everybody, and welcome back to Ask the Unfaithful. My name is Sam. I'm joined by my counterpart in the great state of Florida, who's having some humidity today and enjoying himself, my buddy James Anir. James, how are things? How are you? How's the new puppy?
The new puppy, so that everybody knows, it's a Great Dane puppy, which means it's like a full-size dog. It's a 14-week-old dog, and it really enjoys outside, which I don't. So, and Sharon went away up to visit her mom in Tennessee today. So I get the full tilt. I'm so grateful she has been handling 90% of the dog. So I'm going to have to get used to getting up at, dark 30, because that's when the dog wakes up. So anyway,
Better you than me.
it's
Better you
good.
than me.
I'm not feeling overwhelmed at all. And
Good. All right.
I've had to listen to one of my very favorite songs of all time, Leonard Skinner's Simple Man. It's sort of an anthem for me when I get overwhelmed, because it reminds me to slow down, take things simply, breathe.
If it wasn't for copyright issues, we'd probably have lots of soundtracks of Leonard Skinner, Led Zeppelin, Pearl Jam, the Foo Fighters. We would have a great soundtrack, but we're not there yet where we can afford to pay out some rights
Yeah.
and royalties, so we'll just stick with our homemade music. Over the last few weeks, man, we've had so many new subscribers. We just want to honor you. We want to thank you for joining this little community. I was doing a podcast yesterday with a guy, and he asked me some great questions, and I just said to him, man, I'm so honored that I get to do what I do, that I get to do this podcast with you. For those of you that have just gotten to know us the last few episodes, we are thrilled that you are here, and there is no illusion of perfection. We're just two screw-ups trying to do the best that we can with what we've learned over the last 20 plus years. Having said that, today we're going to tackle a question that is actually more of a statement. It's more of a declarative statement of 5 ways the unfaithful are defensive and reactive. James, do you ever remember being defensive or reactive? Probably not, right? You were never defensive or reactive.
I wasn't even reactive this morning. I have to admit, the defensiveness goes before the reactiveness, or at least for me, it did.
Yeah. I think all of us who've been unfaithful, who have had to answer some really hard questions, and we've had to take accountability for some really poor choices, all of us at one time or another have been defensive, and we've certainly been reactive. And for those of you that are unfaithful, we just want you to feel safe, and we want to help you move down the road. We're going to share 5 ways that we both were able to move away from the defensiveness and the reactiveness. We're going to share 5 ways that really helped us in our own journey, and 5 ways that we both, James and I, help clients in our own coaching and in our own practice. And what I love about you, James, is you'll share some stuff from the intensives that you and Sharon do. So as we launch out, as always, let's have you kind of start the conversation of defensiveness and reactiveness.
Sure. So let's put a little grease in the frying pan, as they say in Tennessee. That's for my lovely wife, Sharon. So there are 2 types of defenses, and what we're going to talk about today are the ones that are reactive. There are also embedded defenses. So if you just think of the way that our model says it is, if you think of a castle, you've got all the battlements, right? Those are the embedded ones. Those are the things that we learned really young, and we've kept there to keep everything at bay. The reactive ones are when something comes at us and boom, we react. And that's in order to immediately put a shield up or fire an arrow or whatever that is. So we go sort of more on there's an immediate defense, or we go on the offensive. And that's the reactive part. And so those are what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, and last episode, we talked about image management. Yeah. I mean, that's another type of defensiveness. We try and manage our image, and we covered that pretty extensively. So if you want to watch more, you can go back to our most recent episode where we'll talk about that.
Can I say a word about that, Sam?
Always. It's your podcast. You get to say whatever you want.
uh, sometimes I feel really inadequate, and sometimes I feel, like I'm not as popular as you, and that I just don't quite have that outgoing personality. So I bought one of these so that I've got
I mean,
my inner
it
Sam.
looks like my hair color. I mean, it's really close. I feel offended, but yet
Is
honored that
it
at
not
some
tall
level.
enough? Maybe.
I mean, I think my hair is a little bit better just because it's natural, but I think that was well played. So now we'll jump into your five that we have today.
Yes, let's do that. So number one is well, okay, not number one, it's just number one we're going to talk about. This doesn't mean that it's number one, like top of the list, but it's people
Right.
betrayed. You're going to know exactly what we're talking about when we say people pleasing. The ones who are going to have a little harder time grasping it are actually the unfaithful, and that's why this is Ask the Unfaithful, so that we can help you see this. We people please all the time. And what
Mhm.
we're really looking for is outside validation and acceptance, right? So um, the need to be liked, need to be accepted. It comes a lot out of that place of if people knew who I really was, they wouldn't want to be around me. They wouldn't want to know me, which is a very
Right.
common way that we view ourselves before we get into recovery, before we do shame resilience work. So the idea there gets to be don't rock the boat at all costs, because if we rock the boat, we're going to draw attention to ourselves and maybe be judged, maybe be uh, rejected, abandoned, and so on. So it's in defense of those things. Um, and those things can really hurt, right? And everybody has that to an extent. Unfaithfuls, we tend to have that to a greater extent. And what we
Yeah.
might do is I'm going to use a big word for me now, subjugate, right?
Okay.
Now, there's a different, some people say, oh, subjugate, self-sacrifice, that's the same thing. It's not. And here's what the difference is. Self-sacrificing is voluntary, it's conscious, it's saying, I'm going to give up some of the things I want or I need for the greater good. So we do that for our families a lot, right? But subjugation, it feels involuntary and largely, therefore, can be thought of as involuntary because that's our perception. But it's really only because it's in service to preventing that huge fear of being seen for who we really are, right? Which is our shame perception, not our reality. And so, also, we will subjugate, meaning give up parts of ourselves or our whole self in order to be accepted. The problem, of course, with that is then we're not being accepted for who we are. So it feels shallow, not real.
Well, we're hiding too, right? We're trying to put this persona forward because we're hiding, and we probably learned that from childhood. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, yes. Yeah. When we're kids, our parents, our family, without them, we don't survive, right? So we need to keep them happy. Now, if we had all had the best parents in the world, we would be able to express our feelings and we would be talked to when we're upset or down or angry and so on. And that would be sort of normalized for us. And we wouldn't have to hide that. But typically our parents aren't like that. We're human beings. As a parent, I'm not like that. I mean, I'm much better than I used to be. But my children, my boys have gotten to a place where they have to do some of their own work. I can't fix some of that stuff for them that I caused. So we kind of live in that place of still being in our child self, right? We don't want to disappoint other people. We don't want to be judged. We don't want to be viewed differently. We don't want to be rejected and therefore abandoned. Um, Sometimes that's going to just look to us like assertion, like being assertive. So if here's, just subjugating, being a doormat, and here's assertive and here's aggressive. Many of us feel that when we're being assertive, we're actually being aggressive. So assertive feels like aggressive. We'll also perceive somebody else being assertive as being aggressive, whereas really it's just here. And
Mm.
but we're so scared of that rejection that we won't, or disappointing someone else, that we will not do that. We will do this, subjugate.
Now, why do we do this? It's interesting because oftentimes we, the unfaithful who've had affairs or addictions or both, we will prioritize other people instead of our betrayed partner. We will focus on work, kids, other people in our lives, family members, when the very person that we should be focusing on besides our own repair work is our partners. But why do we do that? If we're going to talk about subjugation, why do we do that?
So if we're people pleasing everybody else in our life, right, we very often do it at the expense of our partner. We put,
Hmm.
they at least get to second place or last, which is where they've been since all this started. And people pleasing was there from the beginning. So why do we do that? Because our partners are going to love us, right? No matter what. So we sacrifice them in order to get what we need from everybody else. And so that actually is in itself a betrayal. It's not at the same size and traumatic level as acting out, and yet it is compound or chronic. So it
Sure.
does add up to something that big. And that's one really good reason to stop doing it.
And it just doesn't it just the payoff, as you and I talk often, the payoff is just more resentment and more anger and more animosity. Am I right?
Yeah. So, and that leads to self-righteousness, right? I am right, you are wrong, because we're angry. Because when we subjugate, we can't just do that because it's largely everything. We subjugate everything, right? We make ourselves nothing and everybody else this high, except for our partners, right? And then we develop resentments. And then when we do have to, in recovery, swing that power balance a little more over towards our partner because they haven't had any power or in the relationship, and that has to be balanced out, then we get resentful because it feels like, even though we're making a conscious choice and it's self-sacrifice, we confuse it with subjugation. Oh, I don't have any rights, etc. Um, so those resentments just get bigger and bigger and bigger. And especially if a partner says, hey, what about me?
We get defensive and we get angry and we've always got an excuse. So is the solution, there's no simple solutions for any of these today, but is it validating ourselves, being able to have that internal self-reference, as one therapist calls it, that internal sense of comfortability with ourselves?
It is. I'd like to just read something I sent to a client just yesterday. So on validation, he was having an issue with with people pleasing, and he really wants to stop it. So I wrote to him, if you praise yourself, not to boost your ego, but in a real way, like you would praise a child for a job well done, you will need other people's validation and praise less. Their praise will just become a nice confirmation of something that you've already acknowledged to yourself. This is classic reparenting. When we don't acknowledge our own good work, we continue the childhood pattern of starving our inner child of validation. The analogy is, if you're starving and somebody hands you saltines, you think they're the best dang crackers you ever ate and couldn't get enough, but they're saltines. So if you want to stop needing or feeling desperate for other people's validation or praise, um, then treat yourself to some Ritz crackers and praise yourself some, not to the extent of ego inflation, because every time you do a decent job, if you stop telling yourself, well, it could be better, and say, that was a nice job, I did a good job with that, then that's going to feed you in a positive way. But remember, Watch that your ego doesn't inflate. If you start getting cocky, it could happen. All that indicates is that you're getting out of balance.
Yeah.
So,
And I think every betrayed eventually goes, ooh, how much are they validating themselves? And our opinion is this: they have to validate themselves, but there has to be work for them to validate. If they're just validating their laziness or their indifference, let me just tell you, betrayeds that are listening, we are not saying that at all, and that's not worthy of validation. So the first one is being able to understand people pleasing is both defensive and reactive. What's the second one?
well, one last point on that is the more that I self-validated in a good, healthy way, the less I asked Sharon to validate me. And I think that's really important for betrayed partners, because that was that energy suck that we were talking about in a few episodes ago. So the second one that we're going to talk about is anger. Nobody's experienced that, right? So anger usually is anger at ourselves that's
Right.
that's actually displaced and taken out on somebody else, right? Very often partners, most often partners. And there's a reason why we do it, because it backs people off in a hurry, gets them out of
It's
it.
kind of, isn't it common as an unfaithful, we typically will revert to anger almost to one up our partner, to get our partner to cower down, shut down, back down. But it's not necessarily always something that we're aware of. It might be more of a subconscious thing that we are then dealing with our partner the way our parents dealt with us,
Yeah,
because it's the only tool we have. We only have a hammer and everybody else is a nail, right?
yeah. You know, yeah, it's really is. I mean, it's patterned for us, absolutely. And it's the easiest sort of negative emotion there is, right? Anger is a very superficial emotion, and it's the easiest to go to. It's incredibly defensive, because who really wants to be yelled at? Who really wants to have to face somebody else's wrath, if you will? And so that backs them off in the immediate sense, and then it acts as an embedded defense later, because the more you act angrily, the less people are going to want to actually approach you with the truth, right? Or with something that's going on for them, because they're afraid of your angry response or reaction,
Right.
not a response, reaction. So that they won't try to challenge you in the future. It's pretty effective. You know, I don't like angry people. I don't like conflict. I don't want to, I definitely, I mean, conflict resolution is something I've had to work on a lot, because I avoided it like crazy. But anger backs me off in a hurry. And these days, I just don't want that energy. But really, the question has to be, who wants to be feared? Because
Well, also,
that's not love, man. That's not a source of love.
no, but it's also very wounding to the betrayed to
Yeah.
constantly come in contact with anger. And I would dare say I've had thousands of betrayeds over the years come to me and say, how dare this person, this male or female unfaithful, show anger at me when they are the one that has absolutely fed me to the wood chipper. They have absolutely poured gasoline on me and lit me on fire and walked away maybe multiple times, but yet they want to have anger at
Mhm.
me. So maybe if you're a betrayed listening, it might be helpful to understand that this is their defensive position. This is how they defend themselves, and they're not always aware of it. Sometimes they are, right? But they're not always aware of it. Now, that doesn't mean that they're not responsible for it,
We are responsible.
right?
We're responsible for every action we take.
Absolutely.
I mean, we have to be. And so, you know, the problem with anger is it reinforces itself. It goes deeper and gets bigger, and it isolates you more. So it's the anti-connective thing, right? You're certainly pushing people away, and so you're isolated, and then you're going to be angrier still at yourself, and then that's going to lead. It's a nasty cycle. And partners, I think it was our very first episode that we did. Why are the unfaithful so angry at partners? So there's a longer piece on that if you go back to episode 1. There is a solution to this though. I mean, you can
Yeah.
find
How do we intervene?
so there's anger management stuff. You can watch the Jack Nicholson movie. I'm kidding. But I want to sort of go a little slightly different route with that. Um, you know, you have to stop the anger, which means you have to intervene before it gets to a place where it's out of control.
Yeah.
And the way you do that, you can't if you sort of go stop it, right? That's gonna increase your anger at yourself, which then comes out. So you have to be gentle, like you're trying to calm a child down, because guess what? We're in a childlike state at that point. I don't know about you,
Yes.
but when I'm either a teenager rebelling and backing people off, or I'm a 3-year-old throwing a tantrum, right?
Mm.
So whichever one it is, I need to be gentle with that essentially child, right? So I need to say, okay, stop. All right, I need to take a break. So
Yeah.
maybe saying to your partner, I'm losing the ability to hear you. That's really important to me because I'm just winding up in my head. I need to take a break. Or as John Lee in one of your interviews, he said, well, I got to go grow myself back up, right? And then set a time limit so your partner knows, hey, I'm going to be back in exactly 20 minutes, and be early or be on time, but don't be late. Then you spend some time calming yourself, right? And this is where we get to the slight difference that isn't in very many anger management programs, but they do some self-reflection piece, but you ask yourself that why that I was talking about in the last episode. Look at where am I angry at myself? Where am I angry out there, but how is that really showing me that I'm angry at myself? But you got to remember when you're doing it, other people are not the root cause of your anger. Might seem it, that inconsiderate person who cut you off in traffic, getting the argumentative person, et cetera. Sure, that might trigger it, but really all it's triggering is it's opening up that self-anger. So you've got to look at that. And then why might others have been reactive to you and making or triggering you in that way? This really allows you to get past the blame if you're asking that why. It calms you, it gets you to that place. You may not get all your answers, but you are working in that place and you're putting it kind of out there to get your answer back. So your brain's going to work on it. And you're going to get that answer, and you're going to then grow and be able to do something about it. So then you go back on time, and you can have a conversation where you can actually express your emotions
Right.
constructively and calmly.
Because if we're grounded and if we are in our adult self, then we're going to communicate like adults. I marvel at how there's so many men and women who are high level executives who are very successful at what they do, and they communicate for a living in a way that is an elite level of communication. And then they get into a conversation with their partner and they act like 5-year-olds or 12-year-olds who are tantruming. And I oftentimes will tell clients, okay, is that how you communicate in your boardroom or your conference calls or your Zoom calls? No, of course not, Sam. Come on. Well, of course. Okay, indulge me for a minute. But you're talking to your partner like you're a screaming 7-year-old on a baseball field or what have you. How about we get you in your adult self so that when you're in your adult self, you're actually really kind and really sweet. And off to the side, if it's a couple session, their partner's like, exactly. I would love for them to talk to me like one of their associates, you know? And it's not just, would you agree? It's not just there's so much water under the bridge. No, it is what self are we in when we are communicating, right?
Yes, absolutely. You couldn't have said it more clearly. We devolve, we regress into a younger self somewhere where we were simply reactive, right? And I know it's a mental construct essentially, but our brains get stopped up at varying times in our life. It's called arrested development in the TV, right? But It's not like this total, "Oop, I'm 4." Right?
Right.
It's
Right.
little areas in which we go back to whatever age that is and act from that place. And that's okay. That happens to everybody. We just
It
have to
happens.
we just have to do something about it.
Absolutely. So moving on, the third way that the unfaithful are defensive and reactive.
Lie and justify.
Yeah, you saved that one for I'm surprised you didn't put that first, but why do we
They're
lie
not
and
ranked
justify?
now. They're not ranked.
Right.
Different people are going to have different number ones, and they're not everything is on this list, right? And we'll do more later. Um, like lies, we get into a pattern of them. Um, they protect us from, oh, that whole thing of, if you saw my truth, you wouldn't want me around here, man. And then we're constantly protecting that image that we put out there. I'm an honorable person, et cetera, et cetera, and we can't let anything damage that, so we lie. And for many of us unfaithfuls, it becomes second nature.
It
It's
becomes compulsive, right?
Yes, so it can look like compulsive lying. It's I mean, it can be compulsive as well. So yeah, it's not for everybody compulsive, but it can be the reflexive go-to. So compulsive lying kind of goes beyond where we start making up stories, which brings me to another point. We've had more than we've had, actually quite a few clients, probably less than 10, but that's still a good number, who actually admit to stuff that they didn't do. They make stuff
Mm,
up because their partner says, I don't, after formal disclosure, I don't think that's all of it. Or, after something's just been disclosed, doesn't have to be formal. Hopefully you're getting everything. Um, but, then the reaction is, oh yeah, you're right. I did this. I did that. And that's just to get, I want you to be happy with me. I want things to be calm. I don't want to feel uncomfortable anymore. It, of
yeah.
course, is one of the worst things that you can do, because you've already lied and lied and lied. And now you're lying about something you didn't actually do. And your partner is experiencing even more trauma. Oh, you did all
Yeah.
those things. Whereas I'm not saying the partner's intuition isn't right. Intuition is right 100% of the time. It's how we interpret it. To interpret it, that's right about 50% of the time if we're lucky. So we have to investigate, right? And so partners, they'll feel it that something hasn't been told, but it could be that it's not an acting out fact. It could be that it's what's emotional that's behind it. Why they do the behavior in the first place, what drives it. And that can be something that can be something that the unfaithful is not aware of until they get some deeper therapy work to find out what that is, right? Um,
When
so
do
I'm
we
not
start to
saying that's every
justify it?
case. Sorry,
When do
just
we start to justify it?
um, we justify lies immediately
Yeah.
to ourselves. So we're immediately justifying. We justify our acting out. We justify our lies. Um, so the acting out, we'll tell ourselves we deserve this as a reward or a
Mm.
confirmation of things that
It
haven't gone well. We'll
it
tell ourselves it's meaningless. Um,
it feels like we justify it because we've been justifying it to ourselves for the whole time, right? From the beginning of our addiction or our infidelity, we've been justifying it. So what's happening inside of us comes out of us when the betrayed asks us these hard questions.
Yes, perfectly said. Once we've justified it to ourselves, we've then minimized it, we've rationalized it, we've intellectualized it. We have made it, we've taken it from this size down to this, and then we don't think of it as being a big
Yeah.
deal at all. And it is, but we've lost the perspective on that because we've justified it. And so that's going to come out as to the betrayed as there's that minimizing, there's that taking away the truth of how I feel about it.
So this is a tough one. I've had many clients say to me over the years, Sam, I lie. I know that I lie. I don't know how to stop doing it. And I've never had someone who wanted to stop doing it not be able to stop. How we got there looked a little bit different. But for you with intensives and for you in your own practice, and because I've got you on the spot today, so how do you help them really start to curtail this lying? How do you teach them to catch it, dismantle it, own it, make amends for it, all of that?
When I was doing it, I had to ask myself, why am I lying? Why am
That's
I
great.
justifying that? I had to catch myself first, right?
Absolutely.
And it's such a smooth operation at that point because it's, it's mechanized. I've practiced it for so long, it's like muscle memory. So I had to actually start getting myself aware of it. And almost always at that point, it was still coming out of my mouth, right?
Okay.
And so I had to catch it. So first of all, I catch it, right? And I go, oh, because now it's already said. So I have to do two things outwardly to the person I just lied to, most often the betrayed. I've got to try to fix that. How am I going to fix it? I got to own it. I've got to ask for a redo. Sharon and I call it a redo, where we simply ask, we teach couples, ask for a redo.
Absolutely.
And then,
Absolutely. I do
and
it with
we're
my
at,
kids. We
yeah,
can do it with partners. We can do it with kids. Nothing wrong with that.
you're asking for a moment's grace in order to correct the problem. And then you make the amends. We went through an amends process. I can't remember what episode number it is, but it's in the title. And then you tell the truth. And that doesn't mean that it takes away the initial damage done by the lie, but it does go a long way towards righting that ship, right? And so, and the more you practice that, the better that gets, and the less lies that are going to come out. Now, there's an internal way to do it too. To I call it unjustify, right? The lie. You have to tear your own arguments down. So the stuff that you convince yourself of to justify it, you've got to examine that, analyze it, tear it down, see how ridiculous it is.
Yeah.
And
And
yeah.
and even maybe a good question I teach clients is, why am I hiding? What am I afraid of? How old do I feel right now? These types of questions are not shaming questions, but they're questions that make us go beyond the natural. They go beyond the surface level, right? And isn't it a fair statement that if I can get beyond the surface level, that's where the gold is for our own repair work and our own healing, right?
So the overused cliche of peeling the onion, right?
Yeah.
And it's been overused for a long time. Jung came up with it, I don't know, 1940. So that's a very, very long time, right? But it's very true. Cliches are true because they're good ways to say what you mean and mean what you say. So, okay, we peel back that first layer. There's the lie. What's underneath it? What is the beginning of the why? And the more you peel back, the more you get to the real depth answer. At the very least, peel back that first layer.
Yeah.
And it's going
Okay.
to
That's good. I
so
love it. All right.
it will be uncomfortable. Both the owning it and the internal work. A friend of mine who was in AA for a long time used to say, the truth will set you free, but first it'll be a pain in the butt.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And we unfaithfuls, just like in society, we don't like uncomfortability. But for those of you that are listening and watching, I just want to tell you, we'll never get anywhere unless we can do hard things. And recovery is a hard thing. But divorce is a hard thing. And separation is a hard thing. And living apart is a hard thing. Having a broken up family is a hard thing. So, as one therapist that we both know really well says, choose your hard. Any choice is going to be hard. It's time to man or woman up, or as we say in Texas, it's time to cowboy up. Choose your hard. You can do hard things when you have the right people supporting you and you have the right goal that is in front of you. So we're on number 4. So the fourth one, I've got notes that the audience doesn't see. I think this one is probably one of the most close to home ones because I see it so often, is that's when the unfaithful are defensive and reactive, we withdraw, and we avoid and withhold feelings, right?
It's classic, because we run. Essentially, we run. Now we
Yeah,
can be in the same room and run,
absolutely.
just run in our heads, right? Um, and it's protective. It's not they don't call it a defense for nothing, right? But it is a reaction, and our partners will feel it, like all the air's been sucked out of the room because we're suddenly backed away, right? And it's so you can see that it's the opposite of connection. We're withholding our true selves from our loved ones. Um, Avoidance itself is withdrawal, it is isolation, but it's a little more complex than that, because it also can be displacement, which is changing the focus of what's being talked about to something else or someone else, or deflection, which is changing the topic.
Yeah.
So redirecting a conversation away from the emotionally charged topic into something that's easier, which can be like changing the subject, asking a question, joking around, becoming defensive or aggressive. So there is a solution.
But
And
let me ask you this.
yeah,
Is this the same as stonewalling, in your opinion?
it's stonewalling is absolutely a form of it. We could have added that to the notes. Yeah.
Yeah, John Gottman, we both know, and many of the audience is familiar with Gottman. I mean, he's a phenomenal therapist. Him and his wife are therapists, two therapists, and are trainers of therapists. And man, they're brilliant people. And they talk about the four horsemen, and one of them is stonewalling.
Yeah.
But a little adjustment is that sometimes, would you agree with this? Sometimes let's just stay with the unfaithful, sometimes we stonewall, not because we are willfully trying to make those betrayed go away or shut them down. Would you agree that sometimes, maybe even oftentimes, we stonewall because we don't know how to emote? We don't know how to stand in the uncomfortable moments. We don't know how to really get outside our hurt and our pain. We're kind of like your Great Dane puppy. Our emotional intelligence is just not there. I'm not making a defense for the unfaithful to say, come on, betrayed, get over it, give them some grace. I'm not saying that. I think getting beyond the surface, we understand that we unfaithfuls are sometimes, we have no clue how to communicate the amount of pain and hurt and self-hatred and confusion that's going on inside of us. Is that an accurate assessment in your opinion?
It's absolutely accurate. Yeah. So the stonewalling I mean, all of this is the avoidance of going into that uncomfortable, vulnerable place. And stonewalling is one of them. At another time, I'll tell you a story about Stonewall Jackson. Um, but right now we don't have time. So stonewalling, yeah, it's that is a wall, but I would say, okay, it's a movable wall. So
Yeah, absolutely. So what's the solution? What's the solution to this
so
section?
this actually we're going to keep really simple. And remember why I say simple, not easy,
Hmm.
right? Reverse field and go toward the discomfort instead of running. So being
Not a chance. We're not going to do that. Why is it so hard for us? That's scary as hell.
yeah,
Sounds good.
yeah. Oh, well, yeah, like I said, it's simple. It ain't easy. It's extremely hard. It takes an immense amount of internal courage we don't really have that fortitude yet, right? But what I will
Right.
say is the more you do it, the more you build up the fortitude and the resilience to be able to do that more and more and easier, the more you practice it. Like anything else, you have to have the impetus to reverse field. That would be what we talked about payoff earlier, or you mentioned it. Is the payoff to avoid pain, or is the payoff the connection and love that you're going to get? And you can't know what that payoff is until you try it. But I guarantee it is there. You will find
Absolutely.
your love.
And if we don't do it, we're not going to gain really any substantial ground with our betrayeds, because if we're not really willing to face our own failure, and if we're not willing to deal with some pretty large amounts of uncomfortability, we're not going to gain any ground. We're not going to get any trust from the betrayed. We're not going to develop any significant momentum. And that's just the cold hard truth.
Yeah, that is. It's an absolute necessity. We have to get our backbone in place in order
I
to.
love it. Okay. On the
Okay,
heels of that comment, backbone, our fifth way that we unfaithful are defensive and reactive.
playing the victim role. Nobody
Mm,
wants to hear this. Everybody, oh, come on. But guess what? Oh, come on. That's the victim role, right? So
it
feeling
is.
sorry for yourself. Um, and that's where it starts. People can see it from a mile away. And part of it is, where we can use that as a lure when we're acting out. Pity me, etc. But when we're in recovery and to our partners, that it is not a good look. It is not a good place for us to be. It takes us into relapse behavior or down relapse road instead of getting us out of it. So we're going to get to the solution, but a lot of times that feeling sorry for ourselves will be okay. Partner shares how they're feeling, right? How devastated, and you go, yeah, but look how it's affecting me, right? So it all is coming back at myself, throwing yourselves a pity party, getting grumpy, thinking the world's against us. Oh, she or he always does this. I have rights too. Why can't I have feelings? You know,
Yeah.
and what it does is when we get stuck in that, it's like a quagmire. We get stuck in it,
Yeah.
sucked into it. Um, it reinforces our sense of entitlement. And I want to say this: nobody likes the word entitlement. It's a really, really ugly word, right? It comes from what we didn't deserving as a child, what we didn't get, what we
Mm.
deserve becomes as an adult entitlement
Hmm.
because we're desperate
Interesting.
for it and we're going to grab it any chance we get. And so it's a gimme, gimme, gimme versus a, hey, a child just deserves to have that, right?
Right. Absolutely.
And guess what? It not just reinforces resentments, it develops new ones.
Yeah. And it pushes your partner away from you. They don't want to be married to a child. They don't want to be in a relationship with someone they have to coddle and that if you've got kids, the last thing that you want is for your unfaithful to act like another one of your children that you have to babysit and coerce and do all this, you know, not manipulation, but you have to do this little dance to get them to do anything, like you have to do this little dance to get your 4-year-old to take a bath. And so many betrayeds feel like that, whether it's an unfaithful male or female. They feel like, okay, every one of my kids I have to do a little dance with to get them to eat their food or take a bath or wash their hair. Now I got to do a whole new dance with my unfaithful to just get them to do a therapy session or a coaching session or take a course or read a book. And it just becomes exhausting to the where the betrayed just says, he's the victim or she's the victim. And here we are again, right?
Yeah. One of our betrayed partner clients actually said when he is the victim, it's like being married to a non-person.
It's the younger folk would say it's like an NPC, a non-playable character. That's what it feels like. You've got somebody not even in the game, not even useful, just taking up space. So we're being pretty direct on this. What's the solution? How do you help the unfaithful break free of this?
So there are a lot of really positive ways. You can use that motivation to get positive about, okay, I don't want to be a victim here. Who am I really? Because when she said that about being a non-person, that also meant the victim took the place of his personality, right?
Hmm.
So where's my personality? Who am I really? Who did my partner marry? Right. The another solution is to just get sick of it. I had to go. I went, how do I get out of this? It's such a reflex. I'm so used to it. I mean, all my life, right? Okay,
Yeah.
so I had to get sick of it. I had to, I mean, just go, oh, no. And one of the ways I did that was I kind of went, how do I feel when somebody else doesn't own their own stuff? How do I feel when they get blamey, or when they, throw off blame on other people? How do I feel when they're playing the victim, right? And it isn't good. I want to say, hey, straighten up, man. You
Yeah,
know, quit playing the victim. We get almost angry at it. You know why? Because we're doing it ourselves. It affects
yeah,
us. So that helps me sort of go, no, I really don't want to be there. Also, I don't want to be disconnected from Sharon. It's the last thing
yeah.
I.
I think it's so well said because there's a point where the mature part of us, the adult self says, and this is painful, but it's how we as adults find our way and find our healing, is to say, what part of this do I have to own? What part is mine to own? Now, there's this really unique situation where, not unique situation, but there's this real difficult situation where the unfaithful says, I've got to own what I've done, but I still can have opinions. I can still have desires and wants and needs. I
Mhm.
can still have areas where I can say, well, I felt this or I felt that, and have it be listened to. But until there is the main disposition rather, that says, I have put myself here and I have nobody to blame. I could have done a litany of other things and I did not do them. I put myself here. Until a betrayed hears that, would you agree that a betrayed doesn't care about any opinions, thoughts, feelings, aspirations, hurts, wounds, or offenses from the unfaithful until they can, with a true, honest, sober, compelling disposition, say, at the end of the day, I put myself here and I have no one to blame except myself.
Why should betrayeds listen to anything until that is very apparent? That is surrender. That's a first step. That's to say, I put myself here, right? Obviously, this has gotten to a place where I cannot do this anymore. And I don't know how to get myself out of it, right?
Right.
So
That's the piece. That's the piece. I'm so glad that you said that. I don't know how to get myself out of it. Man, I think so many betrayeds, like it almost produces raw emotion in me that just makes me say, you are so right, because that says, I need help. I am, as a great friend of mine and mentor said, Rick Reynolds, I am a human wrecking ball and I don't know how to stop until we reach that point. So, as we end today, if an unfaithful is listening and they just heard you say that and are like, man, cuss word, cuss word, cuss word, emotion, 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 but it resonated with them, what can they do? If they are like, you know what, James, you're right. I can't, I can't do this myself. What do they do?
so if I put it all in a nutshell, learn how to respond from your adult space rather than react out of your wounded child space.
And then that requires them to go get help to even understand what that means, right? I
Yeah.
mean, that requires them to go to someone like us and say, help me do this work because I cannot do it on my own. I'll never forget. I was talking to one of my mentors, and I'll never forget. He was on the phone with the guy, and he said, it was a pretty raw discussion. He goes, are you sick of you yet? Because I don't hear you being sick of you. And until you're sick of you, stop calling me. Because it's you, and you, and you. When are you going to get sick of you? I can't help you until you're sick of you. But I got to tell you, this is my mentor. He said, I'm sick of you. And until you're sick of you, we're in a stalemate. So don't you think we have to get sick of us?
Yeah. We have to get sick
So
of how we're acting. Yeah.
so sick of us that we're willing to invite somebody else into our life to help us, right?
Yes. So the payoff changes, right? we got so sick of it, it's no longer feeding us, or it never really fed us. It fed us poison, but it felt like we were being fed by it.
So you've been listening to Ask the Unfaithful. We are honored that you're here. James, I had the pleasure of having your wife Sharon in for a great discussion on boundaries the other day. And she talked about how you all do intensives for individuals.
Mhm.
So maybe there's unfaithfuls that are listening and they're like, I'd like to know a little bit more. How do they find out more about individual intensives? Because maybe they're a betrayed or maybe they're an unfaithful and their partner isn't willing yet, but they might be interested in doing an intensive by themselves with you or with Sharon or both. How do they find out about that?
So they would email our office manager, Gail, at info@hope, HOPE, for FOR, US.com. That'd be the
Awesome.
best way. And Gail can help them with everything.
Awesome.
Thank
We
you.
want to thank you for tuning in. It's been our pleasure to be with you. It's been an honor. We are overjoyed that you would spend this time with us. If we can help, by all means, reach out to us at asktheunfaithful@gmail.com. We'll see you next time on Ask the Unfaithful.